Ranking every SMG in Warzone from meta to garbage. This is a list that's always moving around, so I like to make a tier list every 2 months on all the Warzone weapons, and this tier list will be showing you what you need to be using. And let's jump straight into the Modern Warfare SMGs. The Fennec, and I think this weapon is very viable, if not competitive, in smaller modes. The reason I'm only throwing it down here is because the damage per mag is very low, but we have an insanely fast fire rate of over 1,000 rounds per minute, and it gives it a very nice time to kill that is above average. Now the AUG, this is a weapon that has an insane time to kill, and I'm gonna put it in competitive, but the reason it isn't meta is because the mobility on it is very horrendous because you gotta use the 5.56 ammo, and if you use the 30 round mag, then its mobility isn't too shabby, but then you have really bad damage per mag, so in solos you could definitely get away with that, but once you're playing bigger modes, you gotta use the 60 round, and you're gonna be moving around like a really slow assault rifle. The Modern Warfare MP5 is a weapon that's also on the brink of being meta, but I'm gonna throw it down on competitive. This MP5 just has really elite hipfire and a very good time to kill, slightly worse than the AUG by 10 milliseconds, but I'm only having it in competitive instead of meta because there's a gun that will come up later that does what it does, but better. The PP19 Bison, this used to be a garbage tier weapon, but they ended up buffing it into, I would say, the viable category just because it has really good damage per mag. It's pretty accurate. It's sort of like a Bullfrog, but slightly worse. Now I'm going to do the next two together, the ISO and Striker. Garbage and garbage. The Striker is arguably the worst SMG in the entire game, and then the ISO wasn't much better. I don't have anything to say about them other than please never run these weapons. Now the next two weapons I think are similar as well, and I'll put them in the same tier with the CX9 and MP7. They're both within 5 milliseconds of each other on their time to kills with 693 and 688. What they do well is they both have a pretty good fire rate. They're both really accurate, have clean iron sights. They're really easy to use, so any skill level player can rock with them. The P90 is sort of in the same echelon as the PP19 Bison and the Bullfrog because it's one of those ones where you have pretty good damage per mag, pretty accurate, and it has a slightly below average time to kill, but since it's so easy to use, you can get away with running it. The Uzi is going to be another viable sub, but I don't really like it because if you want to get a competitive time to kill, you got to use a 32 round mag that changes up the damage profile. If you don't run it, the TTK is horrendous and I would call that thing garbage, but with the 32 round mag, it's competitive enough to be viable. If you're enjoying this tier list so far, please make sure to like the video, and then also subscribe if you want to see more tier lists or top 10s or weapons being directly compared together to keep yourself on top of the Warzone game. Now we're going to move over to the Cold War SMGs, and we're going to start with an AK-74U that is right on the brink of being competitive, but I'm only going to throw it in viable. For one, the mobility is a little slow for an SMG. It's not that bad, but the problem with it is you need to get chest shots to get the good time to kill, which would be equivalent to the CX9 688 milliseconds. If you don't hit enough chest shots, it's going to bring it down to a time to kill around the P90 or the PP19 Bison. So I think it's better than those two because you have more upside, but because it requires a little bit more skill to use and it has a little bit slower mobility, I'm only going to put it in viable. Now the MAC-10 is one of these weapons that I really do not like to run now because the damage per mag is atrocious. The time to kill isn't very elite. It's at 702 milliseconds, but I'm going to throw it in viable just because you still have the really good mobility and the TTK is average, but the damage per mag really makes me not like to run it. The OTS and Cold War MP5 are actually an identical weapon because they both do 29 damage to the chest and stomach, and they also have nearly identical fire rates. They're just 1 round per minute off from each other, so they have the same TTK, and they both kind of aren't that good now. They both have a 700 millisecond time to kill like the MAC-10, but they have less range. But the only reason I'm going to be putting them in viable is because if you get one headshot on either one of them, you do lower the time to kill to 630 milliseconds, which would be equivalent to the AUG, and they can only be used within 8 meters. So I wouldn't run these weapons on Caldera. Maybe you can get away with them on Rebirth as long as you get one headshot. The Milano's going straight into the competitive tier. It's not going to be good as an up-close SMG because the time to kill isn't that good. It's 726 milliseconds. But if you use this thing as an assault rifle, it's still elite. You will remember that they did nerf this weapon recently, but all they did was they lowered the range of it a little bit. Didn't make the long range time to kill any higher. They only added a second range, which put a middle ground time to kill. So that hurt it up close, but it didn't hurt it out at range. And this thing has great mobility as well as it's super accurate, and the time to kill is very competitive with assault rifles. So I love to run this as a long range submachine gun and then pair it with an up close AR like the AS44. The Tech 9, and this one one is also going to be a very competitive SMG. You get a 665 millisecond time to kill. It's very mobile. You have decent range of 13 meters. This thing is very competitive if you have it unlocked. I would still run this the Lapa. If this was made before the mid-season update, it would be top meta. But for some reason, JGod was still recommending it in his top 10 SMGs. But this thing is absolute garbage. It's not as bad as the ISO or the Striker. You know what the time to kill on this thing used to be? It used to be around 630 milliseconds. Now, the fastest time to kill build, you get 747 milliseconds, and you only have 8 meters of range on that. The Lapa, they just nerfed it into the ground, and I don't even know why when only 0.4 or 0.5% of players use it because they didn't even have it unlocked. And once again, I said this last video, but screw Raven Software for nerfing this into the ground for no reason. Now the LC-10, another SMG that is arguably the worst in the game. It's either the Striker 45 or the LC-10. I'm gonna say the Striker's slightly worse because the LC-10 at range has a much better TTK than the Striker, but up close, the LC-10 has 825 millisecond TTK. Why would I use this? Yeah, sure, it's super accurate and it's decent mobility, but you're just gonna be outclassed by every other sub in the game by a mile. The nail gun, we're gonna throw this straight into niche. It's decent TTK, but you can't put a single attachment on it, which makes the mobility kind of bad. You only have 20 rounds in your magazine, and your bullet velocity is terrible. You can get away with it in solos, but there's just so many better options. It's not garbage like these things, so I can't put it down there. The Bullfrog, well, I already said it's a slightly better Bison, so it's going to be inviolable as well. The TTK is slightly below average, but you got the amazing damage to your mag, good mobility, and it's super easy to use. There's no recoil on it, and that's why it's going to go inviolable instead of below average. The PPSH from Cold War, this is one that I used to really love, but I'm only going to be throwing it in inviolable. I'm going to tell you what it has going for it. It has very good range for an SMG of 18 meters. It has a very fast fire rate that's over 900 rounds per minute. It has really good damage per mag because you got the 71 round clip, and then you have elite mobility. But where it falls back is going to be its time to kill is 726 milliseconds, but that is including the open bolt delay. So technically, if you pre-fire the SMG, it's going to take off 33 milliseconds, which would throw it sub 700, which would then be slightly above average. So I still think of this thing as a pretty good sniper support. The KSP, you know, I never thought I would say this, but in comparison to these 4 subs down here, it's not that bad. So I'm throwing it in below average. It just feels really weird and clunky to use with like the burst fire. So I wouldn't run it, but it's not as bad as these 4, so it's going up. The 1911 is going to be the UGR because I don't have like the image of it down here. And the UGR is an interesting weapon. It isn't really good. It's not really bad. It's sort of average across the board. The good news is they did make the magazine 40 rounds instead of 30, so that helped it out. It's just going to go inviolable. I don't have much to say about it. All right, we finally made it over to the Vanguard subs, and one thing you're going to notice is there's not a single SMG in top meta yet, and that's because all of them are from the Vanguard SMGs because for some reason they've just buffed these things out of control to just make them way better than everything else. The own gun is a sub that I don't know whether they're putting competitive or meta, so how I like to run it sort of gives it a really good ranged SMG that's good for sniper support, and you get a 686 millisecond time to kill, which is still above average, but you can run it without a barrel and use the 60 round ammo, and you get a 464 millisecond TTK, which is the fastest in the entire game, but your fire rate's going to be 517 rounds per minute, and it has a lot of recoil on that build. But since the potential is so high, I'm going to throw it in meta. Vanguard PPSH is just basically a better MW MP5, but I'd still only throw it in competitive because its time to kill isn't quite as elite as some of these other subs coming up. The MP40, this is an SMG I've been seeing a lot of hate on, with people saying it isn't even that good, but I think they're just running it incorrectly. You still get a 616 millisecond time to kill if you run the short barrel recoil booster and 45 round mag, which is elite. You have amazing mobility, pretty good accuracy on it as well. Like, it's just really easy to use and good all around. The Sten, this is an SMG I don't see used nearly enough, and basically what it does is it has the fastest mobility among every single SMG in the game, as well as a 620 millisecond time to kill. The only thing holding it back is that you can only run a 36 round mag on it, meaning I can really only use it in duos, which is why I'm going to throw in a competitive instead of meta. But if you're running it in duos, it has an argument to be the best sub in the entire game. The Type 100, this one is going straight into meta, but it's a little bit more difficult to use because how you build it out to get the time to kill 544 milliseconds, which the other time to kills you've been hearing on this list, that is so much better. It's just you're going to have a lot of recoil on it, so it's a higher skill weapon. The Tommy Gunner M1928, this is the one Vanguard SMG for some reason they just want to keep down, and it's below average. It's terrible. I don't know why they won't buff it. For the next 3 SMGs, I don't have the images of them. They're the 3 most recent SMGs to be unlocked in Warzone. I'm going to start off with the Armaguerra, which will be the top break, and the Armaguerra is top meta. I would throw it towards the end above the Owen gun, but these next 2 are a little better. The TTK is 671 milliseconds, which is definitely way above average, but it's not quite as elite as some of these other ones up here or even the Sten. But what makes it so good is that it has really good accuracy, you have good mobility, and you have really good damage per mag. It's kind of like a Bullfrog on steroids. If you were a Bullfrog fan, you're going to be a fan of the Arma. Next up, I'm going to go to the H4 Blixen, which will be the 1911 sprite, and this is what I think the best SMG in the game is right now. You have a 600 millisecond time to kill, and if you get one headshot, it goes to 500, which is then even better than the Type 100. But the difference is this thing is super accurate and easy to use with a very good mobility. The only downside is you only have 600 rounds per minute, making it a little bit less forgiving than some of these other SMGs. For the Wellgun, this is going to be the Rat sprite right here, and I'm going to throw in the top meta. We have 2, 4, 6 meta SMGs from Vanguard, which is absolutely ridiculous, like how obvious they're making it that they want Vanguard weapons to be the best. The Wellgun, you can get a time to kill of 639 milliseconds. You can make it really accurate. It has very good mobility. It's just going to be damage per mag is the only thing holding it back, but it's so easy to use that it has to go into meta. If you want to see the top 10 SMGs and their best class ups, I'll have a video linked here, or if you want to see the AR tier list, it will also be right here. I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.